This walk covers the most significant places of Father Claret's life in Rome. We will visit what remains of the church and of the convent of St. Adrian, where Father Claret stayed during his last 2 visits to Rome. The itinerary of the third walk is from Largo, Argentina to Trastevere. We start at San Carlo ai Catinari. We go to visit the Church of the Jesuits, and we go to the convent of St. Adrian in the imperial forms. We pass by the Marmettine Cavel, and we go up to Santa Maria in Araceli on the Capitoline Hill. We go down towards Santa Maria della Consolazione. We enter the Tiberina Island to visit the hospital Frater Beni Fratelli. From there, we walk towards Trastevere to see the Church of Santi Quaranta Martiri e San Pasquale Beilon in Via San Francesco a Ripa, where the walk ends. We begin this walk in Largo, Argentina. In Largo Arenula, on the right, is the Church of San Carlo ai Catinari.
It is called ai Catinari because the potters, or catinari, of the area used to live on this street. Its interior is rich in works by Domenichino, Cortona, Lanfranco, Algardi, D'Arpino, and Guido Reni.
In one of its side chapels is a painting of the Virgin of Divine Providence, considered miraculous, and around which a confraternity was established, to which Claret enrolled and was admitted on the 14th of March, 1840, a few days before leaving Rome. From there, it is easy to reach, crossing Largo Argentina again, the Chiesa del Gesù. It is the first, main, and most majestic church of the Society of Jesus in Rome, built between 1568 and 1584 by Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, according to a design by Vignola.
It is a typical Baroque and Counter-Reformation church, a model for many other churches. It has a single nave. The ceiling frescoes by Basiccia depict the triumph of the name of Jesus. In the right wing, there is a precious reliquary by Pietro da Cortona with the arm of St. Francis Xavier and a painting by Murata. To the left of the high altar is a bust of St. Robert Bellarmine, cardinal and theologian of the Counter-Reformation, done by Bernini. In the chapel next door, popularly known as the Madonna della Strada, there is a 15th century painting of the Madonna. On the left arm, above the altar designed by Andrea del Pozzo and flanked by lapis lazuli columns, is a copy of the image of St. Ignatius. The original, made entirely of silver, was sold so that Pius VI could pay the tribute imposed by Napoleon in the Treaty of Tolentino.
Claret went to the house next to the church seeing that his plans to meet with the Cardinal Prefect of Propaganda Fide to leave for the missions had failed. He thus decided to make the spiritual exercises that he had not yet been able to make that year. On the advice of his director of the spiritual exercises, Father Bernardo Hernandez, Claret asked the Superior General, Father John Philip Ruthven, to join the Society of Jesus, which may have taken place on the 28th of October, 1839.
The day after I made the request, Father General wanted to see me. I went to see him, continues Father Claret, and when I got to his room, the provincial was coming out. He spoke to me for a while and said, "That father who was leaving when you came in is the provincial who lives in San Andres di Montecavallo. Go to him and tell him that I am sending you and that whatever he decides, I take it for granted."
A few months later, at the end of February 1840, Claret returned to his house to meet with Father General, who advised him to leave the novitiate and return to Spain.
The Lord did me a great favor by taking me to Rome and introducing me, even if only for a short time, among such virtuous fathers and brothers. In time, it became known that Father General was inspired when he said these words to me. And in one of the letters he wrote to me, he told me, "God brought you to the society, not to remain in it, but to learn how to win souls for heaven."
As we have said before, on the 16th of February 1840, while Claret was in the infirmary of the novitiate of the society, suffering from pain in one leg, José Cheffrey, the future confessor of the congregation, was ordained priest by Bishop Antonio Piatti, Patriarch of Antioch, Vicar of Rome, in the chapel of the Congregation of the Nobles, in the house of the professed members of the Society of Jesus, next to the Church of the Jesuits. A century later, in May 1950, this church was chosen to celebrate the Triduum of Thanksgiving for the canonization of St. Anthony Mary Claret, not only because of its size, but above all because of the close ties that bound him to the Society of Jesus and to this house in particular. Walking along Corso Vittorio Emanuele, we reached the large Piazza Venezia and walk along Via dei Fuori Imperiali. We are right next to the most important place of our Roman walks, where Claret stayed during his last two visits to the Eternal City, the convent of St. Adrian. The convent of St. Adrian, belonging to the Mercedarian Fathers, was located between the three forums, the Roman Forum, the Forum of Julius Caesar, and the Forum of Augustus, attached to the present-day Curia near Piazza Venezia.
The Curia was the seat of the Senate of Rome, built by Julius Caesar and completed by Emperor Augustus in 29 BC. At the back was the presidency. At the sides, on 3 steps, sat the 300 or so senators. The floor was of marble. Its door was moved to the Basilica of St. John Lateran. This building was converted into a church at the time of Pope Honorius I, who reigned from 625 to 640, and it was dedicated to St. Adrian, a military saint. In 1931, it was restored to its original appearance.
In Father Claret's time, the street where the convent was located was called Via Bonella, in the middle of a neighborhood. This convent was attached to the Church of St. Adrian, the Curia of Julius Caesar. Thus, Claret celebrated Mass daily in the place where the Roman senators met and which we can now see recovered. The interior had been transformed into a church, and a dome, belfry, and buttresses had been built over it, which have now all disappeared. While the church has been transformed back into the Curia of Julius Caesar, the convent was completely destroyed along with the entire surroundings area, transformed into what is now the Via dei Fori Imperiali. Claret stayed in this convent on his second trip and on his third trip during the council. As he wrote to Father Chaffray, the Mercedarian Father José Vieg, who lived as the missionary of the congregation in Vic from 1850 to 1860, did not offer him a house to stay there.
First, because he judged her unworthy to receive such a person, and then because he thought that His Excellency intended to stay with the Jesuits. If he comes as I wish and hope, even if we have to put him in a room of novices, he will be very happy. However, if His Excellency wishes to go to the Jesuits or the Vincentian house, write to me. With us, he will be in poverty, but with freedom. With the Jesuits, he will be much better, but with less freedom. And with the priests of the mission, he will very much be withdrawn.
At St. Adrian's, Claret received hospitality and a warm welcome. He accommodated himself as best he could in the manner of the Mercedarians. He did not ask for any distinction at table and was allowed to live in common with the brothers. He lived in extreme poverty because on leaving Paris, he no longer received his small allowance as confessor to the Queen. He visited the Blessed Sacrament exposed at the 40 hours devotions in various churches almost every day. In this convent of St. Adrian, he wrote numerous letters and personal notes, resolutions, revelations, pamphlets, and his chronicle of the council, translated and adapted the work of Remedies Against the Evils of the Present Time, applied by means of the Most Holy Rosary. But above all, he wrote his well-known work, L'Egoismo Vinto, 1869, a brief and precious life of St. Peter Nolasco, founder of the Mercedarians, in which he unconsciously attributes to the saint the life and spirituality that Claret himself had followed in his childhood and youth, and where he speaks at length of the apostolic zeal that moved him throughout his life. And now we come to the famous Maritime prison, where according to Christian legend, St. Peter was imprisoned before being crucified, and even baptized others with water from a spring that miraculously emerged from the bottom of the well. It was an ancient cistern with access to the city's main sewer. The lower cell was the site of executions, from which the bodies of the executed were thrown into the sewer. According to his written testimony, Claret visited the prison where St. Peter was imprisoned before his martyrdom. Now it is time to climb to the top of the Capitoline Hill, where the Church of Araceli is located. This church and the adjoining convent are located on the highest part of the Capitoline Hill, where the Acropolis once stood, and where, according to tradition, the Sibyl foretold to Augustus the birth of the Son of God.
In 574, it was already considered an ancient church. In the Middle Ages, it was like the Roman Forum, where senators met to discuss public affairs. The ceiling frescoes with naval motifs recall the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. It contains paintings by Pinturicchio and mementos of many Roman families. The 15th century image of the infant Jesus, made of olive wood from the Garden of Gethsemane, is famous.
On the 7th of October 1839, Claret arrived at this Franciscan convent with a letter of recommendation for Monsignor Villardel, Bishop of Mount Lebanon, asking for help to be presented to the Congregation of Propaganda Fide. This bishop, however, had already left for his destination. From the top, we can imagine the path that Claret took, crossing the forums to reach the church of Santa Maria della Consolazione. The Roman nobleman imprisoned in the capital stipulated in his will in 1385 that the image of the Virgin be painted, and this was done.
In 1470, a man condemned to death invoked her, and his life was saved. These and other prodigies aroused a popular devotion, so much so that a small chapel was erected in honor of this image, since then called the Madonna of Consolation, and a confraternity was created. A hospital was built next to this chapel, which became one of the most important hospital complexes in Rome. It was here that St. Luigi Gonzaga died in 1591, exhausted by his work on behalf of the plague victims, and himself a victim of the disease.
Claret often came to visit the sick in this hospital during his stay in Rome, during the work of the council. Today, the hospital is a military barracks, although the church and the image of the Virgin have been preserved. And we are very close to the Tiber Island. You only need to go to Lungotevere, Pierleoni. There you will find the Frate Benefratelli Hospital. The hospital, located opposite the Basilica of San Bartolomeo, was founded by the followers of St. John of God in 1583 and subsequently renovated by Caesar Barzani between 1930 and 1934.
On the right is the church of San Giovanni Calibata, built on the remains of the temple of Jupiter Urarius and dedicated around 870. The facade is the work of Luigi Barattoni in 1640, later completed by Romano Carapeccia in 1711.
St. Anthony Mary Claret frequently visited the hospital of the Brothers of St. John of God on the Tiber Island in 1869 and 1870. During these visits, Claret is very likely to have visited the church of San Giovanni Calibiti and prayed before the image of the Madonna of the Lamb. Once here, we cannot miss the famous Trastevere and the beautiful Basilica of Santa Maria in Trastevere. But very close to this basilica is the last Claretian part of this walk. It is the small and forgotten church of Santi Quaranta Martiri e San Pasquale Belon in Via San Francesco a Ripa. It is dedicated to the 40 Roman soldiers who, during the persecution of Licinius in 310, when they did not abjure their Christian faith, were immersed in a frozen lake at Sebaste and froze to death. On the other hand, St. Pasquale Belon was a Spanish priest canonized in 1690 who is popularly considered the protector of women.
The church is of medieval origin and was erected by Pope Calixtus II in 1122 under the invocation of the Santi Quaranta. It was restored in 1608 by the Archconfraternity of the Gonfaloni, and then, between 1744 and 1747, it was rebuilt according to a design by Giuseppe Sardi by the Scalzi Fathers Minor of the Reform of St. Peter of Alcantara, who added to the original title that of St. Pascal Babylon. They also had a hospice or hospital built next to it. On this occasion, the church became dependent on the Crown of Spain by royal decree of Philip V on December 23, 1738, confirmed by Isabella II in 1856.
On the 20th of May, 1869, in this church of Spanish Franciscans, perhaps the poorest in Rome, Archbishop Claret presided over an exposition of the Blessed Sacrament as an act of reparation for the ravages of the Revolution of September 1868, and in particular for the session of blasphemy in the Spanish Parliament on the 5th of May, in which several deputies mocked the most sacred mysteries of the Catholic religion. And now, if you manage to overcome the temptation to dine in one of the famous trattorias of Trastevere, you can still arrive in time to dine at home by taking the bus in Viale Trastevere in front of Dante's house.